Hello and thanks for watching Best Maths Tutors. I'm continuing to go through our series on algebra, and this time we're going to be looking at simple quadratic equations, and we're going to try solving them using factorisation, which means putting them into two brackets. So for simple quadratics, what that means is we've only got a 1 in front of the squared term, and usually the squared term is x, although it can be any letter really. So the general method that we will be using is, first of all, we've got to make it equal to 0, and then what we're going to do is put it into two brackets where the numbers we have in the brackets have got to add to make the middle number in the quadratic, and they've got to multiply to make the final number in the quadratic. And then once we've done all that, what we've got to do is we can find the answer to the value of x, or whatever the letter is, that will make either bracket equal 0. So it's much easier to understand when we look at an example. So we can see here, this first example, we've got x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals 0. So we can see it does actually equal 0 there. And what we're going to do is attempt to put it into two brackets. So I'm going to just make two brackets for myself. And the first term in each bracket is actually going to be an x, because x times x would give me x squared. And what I've then got to do is think of a number which can go there, and those numbers have got to multiply to make the final number, which is a plus 2, and add to make the middle number, which we can see is a plus 3. So it's the number which multiplies the x in the middle. So it's got to multiply to make the final number, which is 2 in this case, and add to make the middle number, which is 3. Well, we can see the numbers that would work for that is 2 times 1 would give us the 2, so that's great, that gives us the final number. And also, if we added the 2 and the 1 together, we can see that they would make 3, which is right for the middle number there. So our numbers then are going to be plus 2 and plus 1. So that's still all equal to 0, because the equation was equal to 0 to begin with. And then what we're going to do is we've got to think of x values that will make either of the two brackets equal 0. So the first bracket is x plus 2, and we want that to equal 0. So the x value that would make that equal 0 would be minus 2. So that would be the solution that we'd get from the first bracket. And for the second bracket, we want x plus 1 to equal 0. And the value of x that would make that the case would be that x was equal to minus 1. So there are two solutions. So for quadratics, you do usually get two solutions as well. So it can be surprising, but we do get two solutions for these. So now we're going to look at what's a slightly more difficult example. And it's more difficult because we've got a negative number here. We've got minus 3x. But still the same principles will apply. So we've got to put it into two brackets first. And the first number in each bracket has got to multiply to give us the x squared. So that's going to be an x and an x that we'll put at the front. And what we're doing now is to look for two numbers which will multiply to give plus 2 there. So we can see the plus 2. So multiply to give plus 2. And they've also got to add to give minus 3. So this is a little bit of guesswork usually for these quadratics. And so we have to think of a few numbers sometimes before we do get to the right answer. So after a bit of thought, we might find that we've got to minus 2 times minus 1. We can see a negative number times a negative number will actually give us a positive number. So that works for the plus 2 there. So minus 2 times minus 1 will give us plus 2. So that's okay for that one. And then they've also got to add to give us minus 3. So we've got minus 2 plus, so we're adding them, minus 1. And we've got a plus and minus next to each other. So what we need to know is that a plus and a minus next to each other make a minus. So we've got, actually that is minus 2 minus 1, and that does, as required, give us minus 3. So that's correct. So in fact our two numbers that we can put into these brackets are going to be minus 2 and minus 1, and that is equal to 0. So now we need to look at our two brackets and find the value of x that would make the brackets equal 0. So for the first bracket we've got x minus 2 equals 0, and we can see that if x was 2 there, then actually that would make that bracket 0. So the first solution is that x is equal to 2, and the second solution comes from the second bracket equaling 0. So that is x minus 1 equals 0, and the value of x that would make that true would be if x was equal to 1. So there are two solutions for this second example. So in our third example, I've changed the letter just to show us that we can actually use any letter for this. So this is still a quadratic, but I've used m instead of x. X is the usual one that's used, but it could be any letter. So we have to just treat it in exactly the same way. So again, we're going to put it into two brackets, and this time the number that's going to, or the letter that's going to go in front of each bracket is going to be an m and an m, because the m's multiply to make m squared. So now what we're doing is we're looking for numbers which are going to go in these brackets, and first of all they've got to multiply to make minus 10, and they've got to add to make the 3 there, positive 3. Now what we do know is that if two numbers multiply to make a negative, then they must have had different signs. So we can, because we know that a plus times a minus will give us a minus, or in the other order, a minus times a plus will also give us a minus. So we're looking for two numbers with different signs that would give us the minus 10 there. So let's think of a couple of trials for that. So we generally do these with a few trials, so don't worry if you don't get the answer straight away to these. So one way we could get minus 10 is we could try minus 5 times by plus 2. So we can see that 5 and 2 will make, if we multiply them together, I'll put a bracket around that just to show that it's positive, but I'm not adding it, I'm multiplying it. So 5 times 2 does give us 10, but because the signs are different, it's going to be negative. So that works for the first one, but if we were to add them together, so if we were to take minus 5 and add positive 2 to it, so just add 2 to it, then minus 5 plus 2 actually gives us minus 3. So although the first part was right, that was wrong because we want a positive 3. So we could try it doing it the other way around. So this time I'm going to make the 5 the positive one. I'm going to times that by negative 2. And we can see that that would still give us minus 10. So that's great, that works. But we're going to try adding them together now. So 5 plus minus 2. Well, plus and minus together do make minus. So that's 5 take away 2, and that does equal 3. So that's correct. So we know that our numbers that we can put in here then are going to be plus 5 and minus 2. And so from that, again, we have to make the brackets equal 0. So we've got to find the values of m that's going to make the bracket 0. So we can see that if m plus 5 is going to equal 0, the first bracket, then m would have to be equal to minus 5, because minus 5 plus 5 would make 0. If the second bracket was going to equal 0, so m minus 2 equals 0, then for that one m would have to equal 2. So that's going to be m is 2. So there are solutions for that one. So we've got m is minus 5 or m is 2. Moving on to one that might be slightly more difficult. I find them more difficult when they've got negative signs in them. So this one's got 2 negative signs. And this time we've got a quadratic which is in terms of y rather than x. So what that means is when we put it into 2 brackets, it means it's going to be y and y that are the letters at the beginning of the brackets. That's still equal to 0. But this time we've got to find 2 numbers which multiply to make minus 30 and add to make minus 7. So again, remembering that if the sign is negative here, so we can see we've got negative 30, then the signs on the 2 numbers we're going to have got to be different. So again, plus times minus will give us minus, and also minus times plus will give us minus. So we know that the numbers we're picking have got to be with different signs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and pick 2 numbers which multiply to make 30. So we'll try 15 and 2. Okay, so I'm going to pick minus 15 times positive 2. And we know that works because I've chosen those so that they do work. That does in fact gives us minus 30. But if we were to add them together, minus 15 plus 2, we can see that that would be minus 13. So although the first one was right, that one's wrong. So we need to try something else then. So I'm going to try 10 and 3 this time, because 10 times 3 will give me 30. So I'm going to pick minus 10 times positive 3. So I don't need to write the plus there because it's just positive. And we can see that that would give us minus 30. So that is correct for the first part, for the multiplication part. Let's check if it's correct for the addition now. So if we had minus 10 and we added 3 to it, we can see that we do, as required, get minus 7. So that's correct as well. So our 2 numbers that we can put in the brackets then are going to be minus 10 and plus 3. There we go. And so again, we've got to try and pick the right value this time for y that's going to make the brackets equal 0. So we're going to say, well, if y minus 10 equals 0, well, y would have to be equal to 10. So that will be the first solution. And for the second one, if y plus 3 was equal to 0, so the second bracket, then y would have to equal minus 3. So those are our 2 solutions, and again we usually say it's either that one or that one. If we move on to our final example, then we can see this is a bit different. It looks written slightly different, and we might think that's not a quadratic. But it is, because we've got an x squared, a number multiplied in x, and then a number. But what we've got to do is we've got to make it equal to 0. So in the examples before, they were already equal to 0, but sometimes on exam questions they try and hide the fact that it's a quadratic, and you've got to rearrange it to make it equal 0 before you can try and solve it. So what I would do is I'd try and get everything over to the same side as the positive x squared there. So we can see x squared is positive because there's no sign in front of it. And first of all, I'm going to take away 5x from both sides, because that's going to cancel the 5x here and put it on the left hand side. So I've got x squared minus 5x equals, and we're just left with the minus 6 on the right hand side of the equals. So we're nearly there, but it's not quite equal to 0 yet. So what I'm going to do is add 6 to both sides now, and what that will do, it will cancel the 6 on the right hand side, as we can see there, and on the left hand side we've got x squared minus 5x plus 6, and that's going to be equal to 0 now because we've cancelled the 6's out. And that's great because that's what we wanted. It's now equal to 0 and we can try and solve it using the methods we've already used. So we're going to put this into two brackets again, like that, and we're back with using x, which is a little bit more familiar. So we're going to use x at the front of each bracket because they would multiply to make the x squared. And the two numbers that we've got to think of have got to multiply to make 6, and it's a positive 6 here, and they've got to add to make -5. So we can see from these two numbers that because this is actually a positive 6, we don't usually write a sign in front of it if it's positive, then it's going to be two numbers with the same sign. So that helps us. It's a little bit of detective work, this. So they've got to have the same sign in front of them. But because this one is negative, then I'm going to say, well, it's the same sign, but because they've got to add up to a negative number, then I'm going to make them both negative, both minus. So that's a good little way of thinking about it before we actually come to trying to think of what numbers we should pick. So now we've got to pick two numbers which multiply to make 6 and add to make 5. So I'm going to pick -3 times -2, because we know 3 times 2 would make 6. And because they've both got the same sign, a minus times a minus will give us a plus. So that does work. That gives us +6. So that's great. That works. And then we just need to check whether they will add to give the -5. So we've got -3 plus -2, and the plus and minus make a minus. So that's -3 -2, which does give us -5 as required. So we can put those numbers into the brackets now. So that's -3 and -2. And that bracket I should have written there was equal to 0 as it was before. And now we've got to think of what values of x will make each bracket equal to 0. So we can see we've got x minus 3 equals 0. And the only way we could make that true would be if x was equal to 3. And from the other bracket we can see we've got x minus 2 equals 0. And the only way that could be true would be if x was equal to 2. And we've done it. So I hope that's been helpful to you, and if it has, please consider subscribing to our channel and giving the video a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.